Bearcat fans, I'm excited to bring in my next guest. He is currently a staff writer and editor for The Athletic, covering the Cincinnati Bearcats. Now, last time I had him on the podcast was back in March, and he was one of my first guests. So I think he was on around episode 19, and now we're at episode 72, and he's back. I'd like to welcome in my guy, Justin Williams. What's going on, Justin?
What's up, Meach? I'm glad we're both still going with it.
Well, listen, I want to tell you this. So you were part of that first wave of guests that I had, okay? So I want you to understand this. Episode 72, we are at about 60,000 hits, and really we noticed things started to turn after episode 19. It's all because of you. So all the success we owe to episode 19.
I do great at taking credit for things I don't deserve, and I'll just add this to the list. So you're welcome, I guess.
There you go, man. Hey, you have to be super busy with football and basketball. There's so many stories, twists and turns, and things to write about and discuss right now with both football and basketball.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, football, it's been great, and it's important to remember that even as good as things have been under Fickle, like seasons like the one they just had, those don't come around that often. So whether it's appreciating everything they just accomplished and went through, or making sure that you kind of focusing on how things are looking moving forward, it's a good time to be writing about Cincinnati football, and certainly to be a fan of Cincinnati football. So that's always good for me. But yeah, I mean, just in general, this season with how weird everything has been with the pandemic, and just how tenuous just a general schedule is, like games coming up and making sure you're getting everything in. It's made it, I don't know, seem just a little bit more important or pressing. It feels like. So I'm interested to see where the rest of the basketball season goes. Obviously, I think I and everyone else would prefer if I were writing about maybe a team that is able to kind of put some things together and figure it out. But there's been no shortage of things to talk about and write about. You're right about that.
Yeah, no question. So, but hey, I do want to talk some football before we get to basketball, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little football. So I've always been a UC football fan since I was a little kid. But I think even more so recently, because the university actually asked me to come back and start speaking to the student athletes about, life after sports and building connections while you're there. They put together a really, really nice program where they bring in different speakers. Well, it so happens that for whatever reason, the bulk of kids that are there for my speeches are the football players. So I've really gotten to know a lot of these football players on a personal level, talk to them after games. So you know how it is, Justin, when you build a relationship, you kind of pay closer attention, So I really watch these guys. But what's so fascinating is you look at, I mean, obviously it's 2021 right now, but you look at the 2020 season with football. I take you back to 1998. I'm playing basketball for the Bearcats. Rick Mentor is the football coach. The football team was 2-9, and I want to tell you this story. So it's October, and we're getting ready for the whole Midnight Madness deal coming up, and getting ready for the season. So we're going through preseason conditioning and all that good stuff. And one thing that Hugs and the staff used to ask was, "Hey, go support the football team. Go to the games, you get in free, blah blah blah."
Sure.
So I believe the game they played was against Indiana, and I think they lost by like 30 or whatever, the Bearcats did in football. But I will never forget this, and actually Kenyon Martin and I were talking about this recently. We went to the game, and Kenyon, who's 6'9" or whatever he is, he literally laid out on the bleachers because we were so tired from conditioning. He laid out on the bleachers and kind of like fell asleep. There was that much space of nobody there in the student section. How far we have come, and that leads me to say, what an amazing season this Bearcat team has had in the direction of the program right now. All they went through with the pandemic, undefeated. I mean, fans have to be pleased with what's going on. What's your thoughts on where the program's headed?
Yeah, I mean, and look, it's been talked about, it's been written about. but you really can't praise what Luke Fickell has done enough with the program. And it's on the field stuff, but I think it's so much off the field stuff that people don't even realize. Yes, with recruiting, but also kind of what you're talking about. Like, I don't think it's a mistake that when you're there talking to students, you get a lot of football players showing up. But it's all part of the culture that he's built there, and it's something that I give the athletic department credit. They're trying to. That's what John Brannon's trying to do. That's what Michelle Clark-Hurd's trying to do. They're a little bit earlier in their tenures, but that is what you want as a school when you make a big hire like that. For football, basketball coach, something like that. And man, Luke Fickell has just delivered in every way possible. And then even more so because, he's shown he's committed to, staying around. It certainly feels like at least longer than I think anyone ever would have expected, here or, on the outside because of how much success he's had. So, no, that's kind of always been my thing all season. And especially now, like, I know that Peach Bowl loss hurt, but, I don't think it's ending by any means after this year. I think they're in a great position, but just make sure people are appreciating, what this football program, has done over the past 4 years, in the past 3 years really under Luke Fickell, because it's not easy and it's special, but he's done an incredible job.
Would you say at this point the fandom for Bearcat football is as high as it's ever been? Now the Brian Kelly days were great. I thought Brian did a great job of engaging the community. You had a star like Tony Pike, Marty Gilliard, Benz, goes down as one of the great, maybe the greatest football game in UC history versus Pitt. Things were really high at that point. Do you think the fandom and energy around the program is at its highest?
Honestly, that's like of the many things that kind of the pandemic has robbed, college sports of this season. I think that's one of them because it was a little hard to tell. Obviously, whether it's people responding to stuff I write or anyone else writes or, things on Twitter, but, to not have kind of packed houses at those games this year, that's where you really get the real sense, people tailgating and, filling up Nippert and things like that. So it's certainly, right on par, I think, or certainly rivaling that kind of 2008, 2009 stretch under BK. And I do think what Fickell's done locally, recruiting and just, kind of the point of pride that getting a lot of local kids and making Cincinnati football kind of like the cool thing for kids coming out of high school to do. I don't know that was the case, when BK was here. So I think if you add that element in, and then also just some of the interest in recruiting, among the fan base that has come with that, I think that has certainly helped and elevated it. So because of the pandemic, it's a little hard to make the comparison if you're looking at kind of like game day in-season atmosphere. But if right now, if it's still behind that BK stretch, it's very minimal. And I think you could certainly make the argument that it's either right there on par or maybe even surpassed it at this point.
I think you just made a great point with Luke Fickell kind of drawing that circle around the radius of the greater Cincinnati area for recruiting him. You look at Josh Wiley from LaSalle. This kid is a stud. There's no question in my eyes that he'll be playing one day on Sunday, if he stays healthy and stays the course. And, he's really done a great job of recruiting locally, which helps the fandom. But I think even more so, I think yesterday they were kind of announcing who's looking to go pro and all that. And I think that, as much as it hurts to lose some guys that go pro, not come back, whatever the case might be, that does help the program out, though, because that visibility of, hey, we've got players that, are not only developing but are good enough to go to the professional level. That, in turn, helps your recruiting. You agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. And, obviously, there's a couple juniors on this team that have decisions to make. Des Ritter, James Hudson, Myjay Sanders, are they going to come back or are they going to declare early? And you saw that with Mike Warren last year, and fans definitely how cool would it be if James Wiggins, Jared Dokes, if every single person came back that used that extra added year of eligibility? The team would be ridiculous. But look at the great teams in college football. Every year they send half a dozen guys, if not more, into the NFL. And they're great. And that's, Cincinnati is not Ohio State or Clemson or Alabama, obviously, but that's kind of they want to be on that path. So the idea that every year you can send some kid to the NFL, whether he's a junior or senior, and then, guess what? Now you have a high 3-star or 4-star kid, maybe with some local ties, who's going to come in and fill his spot. Like, that is what being a great college football program is all about. And I think people, fans, maybe going into next year, they'll start to realize, like, yeah, we miss James Wiggins, but, Brian Cook is a beast at safety, and maybe then after next year he's going to go to the NFL, and you start to see, like, guys being on mock drafts or assistant coaches going and getting other jobs, not the worst thing in the world, because it means you're doing something right.
For sure. I mean, and you got to think about it, like, if you're a top tight end in the country, you have to at some point look at Cincinnati. It's turned into tight end U with the success
for sure.
Right. And
they got this high 3-star kid at Miami coming in the 21 class, Shimon Matire. I mean, you're going to be a freshman next year, and, like, he's an athletic freak, and could have gone maybe not anywhere in the country, but just about anywhere in the country to play football. And I guarantee you, there's a lot of things he probably likes about Cincinnati, but Josiah DeGuara, Josh Wiley, Leonard Taylor, and let's be honest, Travis Kelce, like. The program does a good job, even though he played here, 10 years ago. The program does a good job of being like, yeah, he's a Cincinnati guy, and he reps it hard, and that's important to people.
Where he wears a throwback hat, he'll wear a throwback Cincinnati jersey. Kelce does a great job of promoting the Bearcats. Well, and another thing too, James Smith just declared. I tell you a quick story. Like I was saying, I get a chance to go and speak to the kids, and after one of my speeches, I have some kids come up and ask me for my number. We exchange numbers, try to keep in contact, and James Smith was one of those kids. But funny story about him is he wanted to talk to me about shoes. Imagine that. So here he comes. I don't know the kid, right? And here he is talking to me about hey, and he's got that accent, right?
Right.
He starts naming off these shoes, and I'm like, wait, what? And he's like, yeah, man, I'm a big shoe guy, blah, blah, blah. That's my accent. That was my
That's your Australian accent?
Yeah, that was my best attempt there. But we started to kind of vibe over shoes and talking a little bit, and then next thing you know, I am flying to Florida, okay? And I'm headed to the airport. I'm at CVG, and I'm getting ready to go to my gate, and I hear this person yelling my name, Meach. I turn around. It's James. He's headed to Orlando to some kicking camp in Orlando. And so we were on the same flight. So we sat there at the gate and talked about shoes for like an hour, okay? So we get to Orlando, go our separate ways. I say good luck. I'm flying back to Cincinnati, walking to my gate in Orlando. Hey, Meach. Him again. We sit down for an hour and talk about shoes again. And so I just became the biggest, fan of his, and I'm so glad that he's now got an opportunity to hopefully play in the league. And I sent him a message that you can buy all the shoes you want. But just a great – and I guess my point with telling that story is it's one thing to recruit – high-level athletes, but when you get a combination of high-level athletes mixed with high-character guys, if they happen to have both agree, great. But I just think Fickell has just done a great job of having a great mix of talented athletes, high-character guys, and you can't measure that. It's just I think a lot of that success has come back to high-character guys.
Yeah, no, you're right, and that's always been, I think something that Fickell's been about. And it's funny, I think when you take a lot of those high character guys, then maybe some of the guys you bring in initially who lean more to the just good athlete, good talent part of that equation, when you get them mixed in with that for 3, 4, or 5 years, it's impressive how many of them end up coming out also being not just great athletes, but high character guys. And, that's really what the culture deal is when people talk about that with coaches, and Fickell's certainly got a good handle on it.
Well said. Okay, so last thing I want to say regarding football. This is the time of year right now where the NFL coaches are getting fired like crazy. I think somebody just got fired right before I called you. So all these coaches are getting fired, so they're going to start looking down at the college level. Of course, Urban Meyer will be, up for the Jacksonville job or whatever, and they'll start looking around. If some of those college guys start moving, how do you think that affects Fickell and obviously Marcus Freeman too? I want to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, fickle, obviously, like, you never know what's going to happen, but it certainly just seems like after what happened with Michigan State just last February, and, he was the guy they wanted for that. He turned it down, and then not only did he stay at Cincinnati, but he signed an extension, and I get it, extensions aren't worth the paper they're printed on, but it was kind of just another check mark that he has shown, like, he said, hey, I'm not interested in maybe looking for other jobs, and then he turned down some of these jobs, some of them publicly, some of them privately. Then he signs an extension. His son signs in the 2021 class that's coming. He's going to be a freshman next year. Like, he has given no indication he's looking to leave. Now, there are a couple jobs, Ohio State, Notre Dame are kind of the obvious ones that if they would ever open up for some reason and they had interest in him, I think he'd have a hard time turning them down. But, like, some of the schools that he has already turned down, I don't know what else would open that would be better than that would kind of draw him away, especially after the season they had. Now, Marcus Freeman's a little bit of a different case. First of all, any defensive coordinator opening right now in college football, and there's some big ones, Notre Dame, LSU, Texas, Auburn, Michigan, like, he's going to be on all those lists for, whether he actually does interview or whether they just want to interview him, he's going to be on there. I think he's going to get some NFL attention. He got some last year. He turned down an NFL job
I hadn't thought about that.
year. So, and, I think there's as ridiculous as this might sound when you think about it in that context, I think there's a good chance he's back at Cincinnati next year. But he's kind of that same example of, like, guys going to the NFL. If Marcus Freeman leaves and he's an NFL coach, like, coordinator assistant, or he's a defensive coordinator at a big time, Power 5 elite school, or he gets a head coaching job at, a mid-level Power 5 or a really good G5 school or something like that, yeah, that's going to hurt because he's great, but it's also just like, this guy deserves any amount of attention he gets, any job he gets, he's going to be a home run hire. And that's part of what Fickle's building. So I'll be interested to see how the next, week to maybe even longer than that, like you said, with some of the NFL stuff, how that all goes in terms of where Freeman lands. But for me personally, if he's back at Cincinnati next year, that's great because he's a great guy to cover and talk to. If he gets a job somewhere else, that's awesome too, because that means it's something he wanted and he has earned, whatever it is that he wants to do, in my opinion.
Yep, no question. All right, well, we just finished up the Bearcat football podcast there. We'll jump into the Bearcat basketball podcast now. Jesus, where the hell do we start here with basketball? So much to unpack, and I'm just to the point, Justin, where I can't even respond on Twitter to all the Bearcat fans that ask this question, that question. I'm just like, check out this next podcast with Justin. So hopefully we can answer
a lot of pressure.
It's a lot of pressure, but fans are looking for some answers and just like some guidance as far as, where the program's headed. So if you look at this team right now, 2-6 overall, 0-3 in the conference, and it just seems like there's so much to be fixed with this team. So I want to attack this in two parts, Justin. I want to first start with what are the problems, right? And then we can look at potentially what are the solutions. So let's start with what are the problems. Looking at roster-wise, there's been a lot of movement. If you want to talk a little bit about that, Rap out, Do back in, Gabe out, Mason possibly back in. How much do you think this fluctuation with the roster has been a problem for this basketball team?
Yeah, I mean it's an issue, and it was an issue last season too. Like Trevor Moore left in the middle of the year, Jay Starola left in the middle of the year. So it's not like it's just something that's popped up here. I mean it's certainly not something that you can just like shrug your shoulders at. I don't think. I think you can probably, if you go case by case, you can give some compelling reasons for each one. That it's not like it's maybe one overarching issue. And then this year you have to add all the I know people are tired of talking about it and thinking about it, but like the pandemic it's having a huge impact. Especially I think you saw what Gabe Madsen put out on Twitter in terms of his note. Like it's living with it and being a student athlete, whether it's football, basketball, any of these athletes, college athletes. I don't know that people fully understand just how difficult it is. A coach gets to go home to his family, to his house at the end of the day. Yep, these players don't have that, so I certainly sympathize with that part of it. But yeah, I think it's I think at the root of all of that, like in-season turnover, is how much off-season turnover there's been. You know, they've added 7 new scholarship players each of the past 2 off seasons. You know, last year was a shortened off season because Brandon got hired in April after Mick Cronin left. This year was obviously an abnormal off season. So you're kind of taking these weird circumstances, you're adding a bunch of players in a short time span, and then you're trying to like make it all work. And I think there's just been a couple cases where it obviously hasn't worked out. You know, they bring in Rapp as a grad transfer, and I think people were excited about that partly because of how he torched Cincinnati last year, but just he seemed like the perfect fit for kind of what John Brandon wanted to do.
Yeah,
and that turned out to just not be the case at all. And, you know, reasons for that, I don't know. You could dig into it. I think he maybe wasn't exactly the fit that they thought he was going to be. I don't think the offense catered to him the way he thought it might. And you could go down the line and do that with each person. But I think because of how much they've had to add each offseason, that's what's impacted some of the in-season departures. And that's not, you know, I'm not using excuses or justifying it. Like I said, I think it's certainly concerning, but I think the sheer volume is certainly a big factor to it.
And if you look at Rapp, like what I was most excited about for Rapp coming in was not just his ability to, you know, potentially knock down shots, but bring in some veteran leadership, right, and some high IQ with him, because I think, as most people know, Coach Brandon is very cerebral. He likes to, you know, through the course of the season, it kind of builds, and you really have to be in tune mentally to play for Coach Brandon. And I thought Rapp was going to bring kind of like that leadership to this team from a veteran standpoint. As you talked about, a lot of new guys coming in, but I just heard, I don't know, it was one of the press conferences in the early part of the season where Rapp was talking about the team and players. And I was just so impressed by what he was saying. And I'm like, man, he's going to bring a great voice to this basketball team. And I personally, just watching it, I just felt like he never did get a chance to really embrace that role. I don't know if it was because of frustration. He wasn't getting shots, wasn't knocking down the shots, and he just kind of put his head down. But I just didn't see that leadership role at all.
Yeah, and, you know, I think, and maybe this is certainly something I wrote about, and I know other people talked about leading into the season, and maybe it should have even seen it coming sooner, like playing him and Vogt together, just it wasn't going to work.
Nope.
And I don't think that was like, I don't think it took getting on the court and actually playing the games for people to realize that, but it really didn't work. And then I just, you know, then you're kind of juggling them and you're putting them in different positions. I know, you know, I talked to Rapp this offseason after he committed, and he made a big point like, I don't want to play the 5. I want to play the 4, and I want to be used like a 4 in the offense. Well, Chris is obviously a 5. That means you can't play them on the floor together. And I think they wanted to use Rapp as a 5 when Chris was off the floor, and he maybe didn't want to do that. So, yeah, you know, I think it was one of those things that maybe it felt like a better fit. I mean, certainly it seems that way. It felt like a better fit this offseason, and it proved to be during the season. And yeah, it's unfortunate that it didn't work out. It obviously, you know, it's going to end up being kind of just a weird stretch having him on the team. And then you mix in Mamadou opting out and opting back in. It certainly can't, you know, for a team that I think is fair to say lacks an identity and hasn't really put it all together. Having, you know, players come in and out, that obviously doesn't help it. And so I think that certainly would lend to some of one of probably many reasons why there's been some early season struggles.
Well, I know, speaking of Dew, I'm happy Dew's back for a lot of reasons. So first of all, I think he's a fantastic kid. He's a great personality. And I think he does really help the team. He brings a dynamic to the team. And specifically, one thing I want to talk about is these defensive woes. And I think he can kind of help out with that a little bit. And so I want to use that to segue into the defensive issues this team has faced. I've said from day one, I do not think this is a very good half-court defensive team and will never be a very good half-court defensive team. Mm-hmm. I've played on a lot of defensive basketball teams, and there's just so many nuances to being very, very good in the half court, and they do not have that. And there's nothing wrong with that because they're teams like that. But where I see them potentially excelling and could help, and I think Dew is a big part of this, is picking up full court and being able to use speed and in some cases length. You look at Dew, you look at Tari to really help in that with defensively full court picking up and causing some problems and kind of keeping them out of the half court. Give me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and you're right that having Dew in that kind of full court press, especially if it's someone kind of lurking at the back, is better than Rapp was and than Voda is just in terms of athleticism.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, this team is at its best when they're pressing full court, when they're playing fast, when they're getting steals, when they're running in transition. Because I agree with you, they're not a great half court defense team. They're also not a good half court offensive team either. So like their best bet right now is
stay away from half court.
Yeah, play fast, and that's press, create turnovers, get out and run. Now the problem is, especially right now, they have basically 9 guys. It's tough to press all game because you get tired, because you foul, because if teams kind of figure it out and start breaking it down. I think another thing I'd like to see them more, and they did this a little bit in that Tulsa game, is I think they should play more zone in the half court. When they have to play half court. I know John Brannon he's not a zone guy. He prefers to play man to man. He has kind of a specific way they guard ball screens. They ice ball screens, which I don't know how technical we want to get in terms of that stuff. But I think one of their biggest problems this year is they haven't done well at defending the ball screens that way. Yeah. And I don't know whether that's a personnel thing or it just the system hasn't totally set in. But if you're not going to be pressing full court and creating turnovers, because it is almost impossible to do that for 40 straight minutes, then I would like to see them play a little bit more zone in the half court. Because, they're, for a lot of the faults they have, I think they're a pretty good rebounding team. They're a really good offensive rebounding team. And for the most part, they've held their own in terms of defensive rebounding, and especially with some of whether they're playing small or just the size disadvantages they might have. I think that's been a positive. So that can be a little bit tougher when you play zone in the half court, but I think it might not hurt to maybe try something like that a little bit more often. And based on what we saw against Tulsa, it seems like we might see that more.
I think you make a great point with the zone, and that leads me to ask this question. So you look at Coach Brandon, like you said, big on man-to-man principles. How tough is it, do you think, as a coach right now? Coach Brandon wants to put an imprint on his style of play to create an identity for his basketball program. How tough is that when, like last year, he didn't coach that team, he managed that team. Whereas this year, he does have more guys that he recruited to kind of fit what he wants to do. Not all the way with recruiting, but how do you juggle that where you want to play a certain style to give the fans, this is my identity for the program, but yet you can't fully implement it because these guys can't really execute it all. So you have to make some sacrifices, like you say, with the zone. And that's not really his thing. And I could see him battling that sometimes in games.
Yeah, and I think you hit it where you said, like, he managed last year as much, if not more, than he coached. And, that he did that and they were able to win and do well down the stretch. And so I think that was kind of like, all right, that was justification for that. I think it's hard for him knowing all the things you said. He wants to put his culture in. He wants to put his system in. It's then hard to move away from those things when he is, so resolute in his belief that if we do this, it will work. And so then it becomes kind of a juggling act. Well, this year's not going well, but so how much do you stick with, the system stuff that you want to do moving forward? So does that matter when guys like Keith and Chris are out on the floor because they're seniors? So, how much attention should be paid to it then if you're trying to win this year or, implement things for next year? It is a tough balance, and I get some of the hesitancy to be like, well, I don't want to go through another year where I'm making changes and doing more managing than coaching, or moving away from things that I want to do just to give us kind of chance to win in the immediate present tense. I get why that can be tough, but it almost seems like whether because of the guys they have that he inherited or some of the additions he's had to make, whether transfers or recruiting or whatever, maybe they don't fully fit that system yet, or they certainly don't seem to be executing it yet. So
right.
Then you might, I think part of being a player is adjusting, and I think that's part of being a coach too. I get why it's hard to move away from what you want to do in your system and what you want to implement. But if it's not working, then I think adjustments might have to be made, and that's why, like I said, I think we saw that last year. I think we're starting to see a little bit of that with the way they played in the Tulsa game. There's definitely things to be encouraged by from that Tulsa game that were improvements from some of the early season struggles. It obviously didn't result in a win, and I think that his point after the game where he said that this team has a very, very, very small margin for error, I think he really hit that. The question moving forward will be, so how do you combat that? How do you change that? How do you find a way to win within that margin? How do you find a way to expand that margin for error? That's going to be his challenge. And if it means going away from some of the things he wants to do, or he kind of bedrock beliefs as a coach, then you might have to do that. That I think will be the kind of the biggest challenge for him, and interesting thing to see moving forward the rest of this year.
And I think Bearcat fans want to see somebody put on a superhero cape and just change everything, and that's just not going to happen, I think, with this basketball team. Let's look at the Twins. So Mason is coming off an injury; he'll be back, and I heard some people chirping that he's really going to help take this basketball team to the next level. Yeah, he can knock down shots. He's been hurt. He hasn't played game reps. It's going to take him a while to even be able to play at the level that people even hope him to play at.
Right.
Gabe opting out. And let me, and you touched upon this. Let me say this, and I think you made a great point. Gosh, it is so tough right now for student athletes in this climate. You got to think about a couple different things. They really didn't have an off season, or a preseason, I should say, an off season and a preseason. Mm-hmm. So coming in as freshmen, a lot of these kids are just being thrown in the fire, man, and they're not having opportunities to, what I say, you've got to make mistakes to learn. And you look at, some of the Cronin teams and the Huggins teams that I played, the first 5 games we play teams where we made mistakes. Freshmen made mistakes. Mick was notorious for, the first 5 games they would play teams I've never even heard of. And I'm in the damn sport. He brought in teams. I was like, I've never heard of this basketball team in my life. But I think it helped because, guys that were young could go out there and make mistakes correct. They could build their confidence. And that just really hasn't happened for this basketball team. So, and quickly back, I know it's kind of venturing off, but back with Gabe and what you were saying, man, it is so tough on these kids to, like you said, John Brandon could go home. The coaches can go home to their families. These kids are kind of stuck and are isolated in an island, and that mentally wears on you.
Yeah, I mean, they're not going to class. They're not, you maybe go out and pick up something to eat, but it's not like people are going out and, uptown or anything like that. Maybe I don't want to suggest that like every one of these kids is a perfect choir boy and it's like, all right, I go to practice and I put my mask on and I go and sit in my room by myself. But right. Honestly, that's a lot of times the only, thing they can do because no one else is on campus. It's, especially right now, it's cold outside. So you're working out, you're with your team, then you're going back and you might have online class, but you're basically just kind of sitting in your apartment or your dorm and you're on your phone. And that is certainly not kind of a normal college athlete life. And so that part's tough. And then, add on top of it, like, yes, those are all things that I think are relevant. But you can certainly look at this team, and I believed that it was going to be a transition year, that they were going to struggle at times. But, they have struggled certainly more than I expected them to. And there's a lot of reasons for that. The pandemic and some of those mental things are part of it, but I think there is also more that goes into it.
So, Chris Vogt, let's talk about, you said struggle. Chris Vogt is beyond struggling. So, in your eyes, what's the issue with Chris? What do you see?
So he came in last year as a transfer and I think was a depth piece. I mean, this was a guy who was a backup at Northern Kentucky as a sophomore. The thought when he came in was he wasn't going to get his waiver. He was going to sit out the season. Kind of miraculously, last minute, he gets the waiver. And then when you just look at like how Jaren started the year and some of the injuries they had in general, all of a sudden Chris is like the focal part of their offense for, a lot of those early games. And he played really well. He kind of got hurt and fell off a little bit down the stretch last season. But I think what we're seeing this year is, Chris' vote isn't taking anyone by surprise. So he's part of the scouting report. He's part of the game plan. And he's struggled because the added attention from opposing teams, he has struggled, whether it's them being physical with him in the post or just like, we know this team is going to try and get him the ball down low, and we're going to do what we can to take that away from him. And I think, when he didn't necessarily get all that attention and was taking some teams by surprise, because once he gets the ball, on the block and turns and shoots, he is a pretty good post scorer. The challenge this year has been him getting position. And also, there have been times where I don't think they're a great entry post pass team either. And you combine those two things, and it's like they seem to be expelling a lot of energy and time trying to get Chris Vogt the ball in the post in the half court offense, and it's not working. And then they don't really have, a backup plan. They don't have Jaron Cumberland who can just put his head down and drive to the basket. So I wrote about this last week or a couple weeks ago. I think they should just run less stuff for Chris on offense. And, this isn't an easy thing to ask a player to do, but be like, all right, you want to get buckets, you're going to get offensive rebounds, or you're going to be a dump-off guy at the basket, or you're going to trail in transition and maybe get some easy buckets that way. Again, that you're asking a lot of effort and less attention, but it doesn't seem to be working, kind of making him a focal point of the offense. And just in general, he's not a great fit for the style of play I think John wants to play, that whole 94 feet both ways.
Yep.
This team, especially when it's best getting out and running, like we said, he doesn't necessarily fit for that. And, we have seen his minutes decrease. I think he played 20 minutes against Tulsa the other night. They went small a lot. So as frustrating as he is for fans, and I know that he is, and I'm sure you hear it too, it does seem like there has been some recognition of that, from a team standpoint, because he seems to be playing fewer minutes and maybe not as big of a focal point on offense. And I still think, if he can then find a way to be a contributing, benefiting player, within that limited role, that's what could help them, maybe turn things around a little bit. But whether he can do that, it will be one of those things that's worth watching the rest of the way too.
So everything you just said is so spot on. And I was having this conversation with a friend, and I told him, my opinion is the Bearcats should not look to throw the ball to Chris and look at him as a primary option. I take it back to Ryan Fletcher, who played for the Bearcats when I played. Ryan was not a focal point of our offense. He was called upon to do several things, and Hugs was like, you will play a lot of minutes if you defend the post and you rebound the ball defensively. Everything else will come to you if you do those things at an extremely high level. And Fletch bought into that. And he became such an important part of our team to where you almost couldn't take him out of the game because he did those things very well. So I think for Chris, if he can, accept that role, if that's what Coach Brandon wants him to do, but start doing some of those things and concentrate on that and let other guys kind of become the vocal point, which leads me to segue into, I think, a player that I've been looking for more from so far, and I think he's done a good job, but I've been looking for more, and that's Keith Williams. And I kind of got a different take on this because I had extremely high expectations for Keith this year. This is his basketball team, going into the year. This is his basketball team. He's got to lead vocally. He's got to talk. He's got to attack. And you know what? It's the foul trouble. Occasionally he takes some really, really bad shots. I get what he's trying to do, but just really, really bad shots. I haven't seen him lead vocally, and I don't mean to knock on the kid because I know him very well and don't mean to be critical, but I think if if he wasn't in his foul trouble as much and has played at an even higher level, we might be looking at a totally different record.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing you're right is fouls. And it's funny, he wasn't in foul trouble during the Tulsa game really, but there was, if I remember correctly, it was under a minute in the first half, and he had one foul, and he just committed a stupid foul in transition. Like, he might as well have pulled out a baseball bat and just clubbed the guy.
Yep.
It was almost like his brain was like, I got to get my second foul before halftime.
Right.
Like that, he needs to cut that stuff out. You know, he's an aggressive player. He's going to get charges sometimes in transition or going for a steal. I get that. But he's had a couple times this year where he's, like, missed a free throw and then fouled the guy 84 feet away, you know, almost out of frustration. And, like, he's too good of a player. He's too important of a player to be doing stuff like that. So you're right. The foul trouble is the first thing. And then the other thing is, yeah, you know, I think you said it, he's forcing some bad shots, and I get why he does that sometimes, because he is such an important part of this offense. He has to be the leading scorer and kind of the, you know, the main focus from that perspective. But I think sometimes that forces him into, all right, I'm going to, you know, take this jab step three instead of passing it back out and trying to reset, or I'm going to try and force this drive because we haven't gotten anything else going on this possession and get to the basket. Or I had to sit out 15 minutes in the first half in foul trouble. I need to make up all these points.
Yep.
And I think if he, you know, if he is does the things he exceeds at, which is playing in transition, you know, playing on the wing, being a guy who catches off of dribble penetration, or being a slasher cutter type guy, that's when he's at his best. If they're clearing out and going ISO for him at the top of the key, or if he's jab stepping on the wing and forcing a fadeaway shot, like that's not where he is at his best. But again, sometimes he's gonna have to take few of those shots a game because of, you know, what he means to this team from an offensive perspective, and that's just the way it goes sometimes. But yeah, I think if he can stay out of foul trouble and do his best to, like, you know, do the things he does well, and for them to highlight those things, playing in transition being one of them, that's where we start to see him shine. And, you know, in the second half of some of these games, he's racked up a lot of points just playing off the press and playing out on fast breaks.
Yeah, and I don't think a lot of the things with Keith aren't done out of selfishness or bad attitude. It's just, you know, he's trying to help. And like you said, he'll take that bad shot here and there, but it's out of trying to help, you know, the team. And I will always say that for Keith. Definitely not a selfish kid. So
he's got to make his free throws too. He was an 80% free throw shooter last year. He's shooting 65%. Like, he's averaging 15 points a game. He'd be close to 20 points a game if he just made his free throws.
So, okay, I'm glad you brought that up. Let's hit that. All right, so people are tweeting at me, do the Bearcats practice free throws? And I'm like, of course they do. But here's the thing. It's so mental. There's so much mental that goes into shooting a free throw in a game. There's time, there's situation. It adds another pressure to a player. And I think there's been frustration with Keith, and as a result of that, he's missed quite a few free throws because, I mean, like, I can't remember which game it was specifically. It was the Xavier game. One of them, he missed just way too many free throws. But, like, he's shooting it, and he's, like, stepping over the line, and he misses it, and his head's, like, going down. And I'm like, this kid has no confidence at the free throw line at all.
Yeah, and you're right. I don't know what the fix is. Yes, they practice free throws. You know, all of them do. And if it was something as simple as, like, I missed 4 free throws this game, so I need to practice, like that would solve it. But, you know, one of my things for him going into the year was, like, he needs to get to the line. He can't settle for jump shots. And he's done that. He's averaging 6.5 free throws a game. You know, I think if he can be in that 6 to 8 free throw attempts per game range, like, that's awesome. That's what he needs. The problem is he's making about 4. Like, you know, getting there doesn't really do you too much good if you don't make them. So we know he's a good free throw shooter. I do think over the course of the season we'll see him, you know, creep back up closer to where he's at. Yep. But that's definitely, you know, I think part of the problem right now, because we've seen it late in some of these games, whether it's him or other people. They've just left too many points out there.
And I think that for the frustration that the fans have, I tell them some of these things they can fix. It's not like, you know, they have capable players that just haven't figured out role, identity, some of those things. It's not like they're running like my guy who I love to death. It's not like Sam Martin's playing 30 minutes or Alex Meacham's playing 30 minutes. It's like, okay, Alex is only going to be able to give you so much, or Sam's only going to be able to get. It is what it is. They're running capable, high-level players out there that just haven't figured some things out. So there is hope there. Like, you can't totally give up on this basketball thing. I think a couple adjustments, and they can fix some things. However, Justin, here's the problem that I see. This schedule is not allowing them to fix a lot of things in game. So you think about this. They turn around, they play 6-1 SMU at SMU. Mm-hmm. After that game, turn around and play currently 6-2 Wichita State, whatever their record will be at Wichita State. So you're playing two 12-win basketball combined 12-win basketball games on the road. Man, that's just as if you're already not struggling. You've got to go on the road and play tough games, and you've got to kind of learn, as you play, and that's tough, very tough.
Yeah, no, you're right, and that's going back to what you said before. They didn't have some of those, kind of, let's be honest, like tomato can cupcake games early in the year. And part of that was they weren't going to have a ton of those anyways because Brandon is a believer in a tough schedule. But because of the pandemic, they lost a lot of their non-conference schedule. They lost 5 games before the holiday break last year, but they won 7 because they had, a few extra. They had that MTE. They had a few extra games they could play. They lost some of those. They lost Western Illinois and, I think Grambling State, some of those teams that they probably would have played it at home and had easy wins and figured some stuff out this year. So that's part of it. But yeah, I think you're right. They're already 3 games into the conference schedule of a 20-game conference schedule. They're already kind of right in the thick of it. Like the time for figuring stuff out, unfortunately, is probably gone, which is making it even more tough. Yep. I don't want to step over like kind of whatever you wanted to hit, but I think if you look, there are some positives, there are some negatives. One of the things I think is a positive with this team is they do play hard. I have rarely felt like there's games where they're just dogging it, and I think that's a positive sign.
Touch on that because I have tweeted that and people have disagreed with me. I totally agree with you. I think they're trying and they're playing hard.
Yeah, I mean, some of it, now that doesn't mean it's disciplined or there isn't foolish moments. I think if you look at some of the foul troubles and turnovers, you could certainly, there's things to clean up. But I haven't very rarely gotten the sense that, they're just not playing hard. I think they need to be tougher. I think they kind of get bullied around a little bit at times, but I don't attribute that to, a lack of effort. I think kind of the flip side of, they play really hard. So then what's the issue is I just haven't seen a ton of progress, individual progress from some guys. I think you've seen it from Tari Eason, and he's a freshman, so that's a good sign. I think we've seen some flashes of it from Mikey Saunders, who's another freshman. Mm-hmm. Obviously, Jeremiah Davenport has probably improved more than anyone else from last year, and that's encouraging. But, whether it's seniors, Keith Chris, Rapp when he was there, Mamadou, who I know has been obviously gone for a while and just came back, but Zach Harvey, Mike Adams-Woods, those, especially if you're looking to next year, those are the guys who need to start making leaps. And so far, I have not seen it from them. And I'm not sure what the reasons are for that. I'm not sure if, we're eventually going to see it this year, when the schedule kind of catches up to whatever a normal season would be like. But if you're looking at the converse side of, they play hard, what is most disheartening to me, it's not seeing a ton of progress made for some of these guys as individual players.
I agree. And how much of that do you think is a result of, guys maybe not identifying their role, accepting their role, and executing their role? Because it looks like Mike Adams-Woods is just there are times where he's just out there. And he's just running around. Zach, I've seen flashes of Zach being really good. There have been some games where it's okay, he's starting to turn a corner, but I just feel like I don't know if they've clearly identified the roles and accepted the roles.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes the Tulsa game, I just thought Micah had a bad game. He had some open shots, they didn't go down. He had some turnovers or just defensive lapses. I don't know if there's a reason you could point to. Sometimes it's just you have a bad game, you miss shots. But, I haven't totally put my finger on yet why, Micah had 16 points in the opening game this season and was they needed every bit of it. He's a big reason why they won that game. Mm-hmm. I certainly don't expect him to put up 16 a night, but I don't have his numbers in front of me. I wonder if he's scored in double figures since then. Nothing jumps out to me if he has. So, and it's not just offense. It's not just scoring points. I think it's guys, whether they're turning the ball over too much or they're losing focus defensively. it's something that I'm paying attention to, but for most of these guys, I can't point and say like, okay, here's the issue. If they did this, it'll click for this person. And I'm sure the coaching staff's thinking the same thing, because if they knew the answer to those questions, they would be fostering that.
Yeah.
But
right.
yeah, why that's the case, I can't say I totally have a grasp on yet. But it's certainly something, especially if this season continues to struggle and people start looking to next year, we need to see some of that development.
Yeah. And small ball. We hear a lot about that with this basketball team. They should play more small ball. So let me ask you, do you think that they need to play during those 40 minutes more small ball? And then also, what does small ball look like for this basketball team? Like, what players fit that small ball role?
Yeah, I mean, I would like to see them do that more. I think if you just look at the Tulsa game specifically, I think where you saw the most flashes, and it makes sense because all the stuff we talked about. This team plays best when it presses, when it gets out and runs, when it plays fast. Playing small would lend itself to that. So I think you can. Honestly, I think it's tough to consider playing fast and playing small ball when Chris Boat's on the floor. He's going to be on the floor for some minutes, but I don't think you could play that way necessarily with him. I think you can play that way with Dew because he's athletic enough.
Yeah.
And then they showed some minutes against Tulsa where they had Tari at the 5 and JD at the 4. I think there was even a stretch where they technically had JD at the 5 and 4 guards, out there with them too.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's some reasons they can get away with doing that. Other than the fact that they play best when they're playing fast, but they have some guards who can rebound. DeJulius is a good rebounder for his size.
Yep.
When he locks in, he can rebound. Zach Harvey, he has good athleticism. He can rebound well for his size, so that helps. The challenge will be, and John kind of alluded to this in his post-game press conference after Tulsa, the more they do it and the more that tape is out there, teams are, they're going to start attacking it. So they're going to, take bigger guards and post them up, or they're going to work the ball inside. They're going to try and get them in foul trouble. That's not a reason not to do it, but it's something they're going to have to be prepared for. And it can't be a situation where they go small, they get a couple steals, they run out, things are going great, and then the team slows it down and just pounds them in the post and they take them out of it. Like, you have to find ways to combat, teams adjusting to you going small. And if they can do that, then I think that's usually the kind of the best path forward for them. But they're going to have to prove they can do it against teams that either have big athletic bigs like Tulsa, or Tulsa sent that Rochelle kid down there a couple times and post him up as a big guard. Like, you got to be prepared for that and figure out ways to combat that if you want to go small for longer stretches.
Yeah. Okay, so let's look at the SMU Wichita State games. Next two games, Justin, what would you like to see those next two games? Give me 2 or 3 keys for this team to be successful and win those next two games.
Yeah, so I think going small and, being able to resist when teams, because anybody that's watching that Tulsa tape, that's what they're going to think about is, how do we attack them when they go small? So they got to kind of hold their own when that happens. The two good things they did against Tulsa was they cut down on the fouls, they cut down on the turnovers.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if Brandon mentioned them being a statistical anomaly, not in a good way after the game, in the terms of they had a bunch of offensive rebounds, not a ton of turnovers. They outshot Tulsa by 20 almost, just because of the pace they were playing at, but also because of how many shots they were missing. They just couldn't make shots. And sometimes that's as simple and frustrating as an answer as that is. That is the answer, is they got to make shots. I thought they played better defensively against Tulsa, whether it was because they were going full court or they played a little bit more zone. But those are the things. Keep limiting the fouls, keep limiting the turnovers, because that gives you a chance. That doesn't just completely put you, behind the sticks immediately when you do those two things. But they're going to have to figure out ways to get, more consistent offense, whether it's David DeJulius or Keith being a little bit more consistent, or finding, Zach Harvey, Mike Adams-Woods. They don't have to score 15 or 20 points, but they need those guys to kind of be in the 8 to 12 range, I think, a lot more often than they have been. So I think you kind of alluded to this at the top. The problems are obvious. It's figuring out the solutions that has been the challenging part. And I think there's different things they can try, but sometimes it's going to come down to guys not shooting 25-30% from the floor.
Yeah, yeah. And the other thing too, I know this is 2 tough road games, but sometimes being on the road is best. And one thing that Hugs was great at was he always created this aura with our teams that it was us against the world. And when we went on these road trips, it was like the whole world's against you guys. Like we really felt like walking out to the stadium, the whole world was against us. And obviously there aren't going to be, a lot of fans there, but sometimes on the road you can gel, create some continuity. So I'm hoping whether it's the SMU game or the Wichita State game, something clicks and we just start seeing something happen and some continuity is built and this team starts to take off. So you never know on the road.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the frustration this season, not that people, if they were getting blown out, people would be frustrated too, obviously, but some of the frustration has been like they have been right there in some of those games and just haven't been able to close, or they've come back and it's been too late. So I think they have that capacity in them, but it's just how do you fix those little things? How do you make your free throws? How do you cut down on the fouls? How do you, get a couple easy buckets and do them all at the same time? Yep. If they can do that, then they could go on the road and beat one of these teams. But it all goes back to that small margin for error. They got to find a way to put them all together at once, and that's obviously been a challenge for them so far this year.
Yeah, and jumping in too, we talked a lot about the current players, but talking about recruiting, I've just had a tremendous amount of Bearcat fans ask me, "What's the recruiting look like?" I haven't heard anything about it. One Bearcat fan even tweeted at me, "Hey, I see football's killing it with recruiting. How come we don't hear anything with basketball?" And I told the guy, basketball is a little different. Football, you're recruiting 100 kids. Like, there's just so many players. You hear about so many kids. Basketball is a little bit different. You're recruiting a smaller group of kids. Talk to me a little bit about anything you know on the recruiting end, and what are some of the recruits that you think they need to, not necessarily specific names, but position skills they need to go after for next year?
Yeah, unfortunately, and I know this is the answer people want, I don't have a ton of updates on the recruiting front for 2021, and I realize there's been frustration because of that. Again, there are reasons for that. Obviously, the pandemic has made recruiting really difficult. Yep. I do think there's been some, resigned to the fact that they're going to have to go to the transfer portal again, which can be exciting. David DeJulius has struggled at times, but I think there's a lot of promise there, and that's a good get for them. But then you also have the potential for some misses like they've had in the portal already. So I get why there's frustration there, and so I'm not trying to just completely wave that away, but I think that's kind of the road they're looking at. In terms of what they need, they pretty clearly need an athletic big of some sort. Like if they could get some kind of rim running center, shot blocker, rebounder, that's great. Those guys, everybody wants those players, so it's not like they're just hanging out there. But right. they need that. And then, all right, so is DeJulius going to be your point guard next year? I think you have to kind of decide that, and then that kind of determines, so are you getting somebody to pair with Mikey Saunders to play point guard and you want to play DeJulius more off the ball, or do you need to go out and get a scoring, maybe ISO type player, to play on the wing at the 2 to kind of replace at least statistically what Keith's given you. They need something in that realm. They need somebody, if they're going to lose 15 points a game when Keith is gone next year, so they got to get some scoring somewhere. So I think those are the 2 obvious areas. And then, yes, I know that the Madsen brothers, we're told that they can shoot, and I've seen both of those guys shoot in warm-ups, and they're knockdown shooters. Gabe's not here this year. Mason has been hurt and hasn't played yet. This team desperately needs some outside shooting.
No question.
They don't have the Javen Cumberland type, the guy where when you're down 3, you draw up a play to get this guy a 3-point shot. They just don't have it. So if you're looking at 3 spots, those are kind of the 3 that immediately jump to mind. Big, athletic, rim-running post player, kind of wing, 2-3 scorer, and then some kind of sharpshooter on the outside. Yep. Easier said than done, I realize. But
right. Yeah. In recruiting, there's such a science to recruiting. There's so many moving parts. I remember I was at a Greater Cincinnati Basketball Hall of Fame dinner, and I was talking with Travis Steele, Xavier's head coach. and I said, Travis, as a college coach, what are your biggest challenges right now? And he looked me dead in the eyes and he goes, recruiting. And I said, okay, what do you mean by that? He goes, because before even recruiting any kid outside of our program, he goes, I have to re-recruit our kids in the program again from leaving. Right. And he's like, this transfer portal is allowing kids to just jump out, as soon as possible. And he goes, so I'm re-recruiting our kids more than ever. And then you've got to look at the kids that are in the portal. You've got to look at high school kids, and you've got to look at international kids. There are just so many moving parts, man. That is stressful.
Yeah, and it's the same. I've heard football coaches say the same thing. Like you now you can never, what it used to be, the kid signs his letter of intent, and then like you can really, start coaching them and, start chewing them out and stuff like that because you have them there. That's not the case anymore because the portal that has kind of changed that calculus. So that's part of it, and we've already seen Cincinnati struggle with that, whether it's guys opting out or transferring or whatever. So that's going to be part of it moving forward too. It feels like they haven't had a chance to get settled yet, and I'm sure that's what's most frustrating for John Brandon and his staff, because I think they have a plan and they have a culture and they have all these things they want to do, and they just, for whatever reason, things they can control or things they can't control, it hasn't gotten there yet. So that's the step, and it does take time, but patience is hard, especially when you're struggling on the floor.
Yeah, and the last thing I want to talk about is Coach Brandon. You just mentioned Coach Brandon, his staff kind of settling in. And here's the thing. Fans always want to fire the coach and bench the player. And it happens in every, NFL, college football, just everywhere. I mean, if you look at Mick Cronin's first 2 years, everyone wanted Mick fired. Like there were like 6,000 people at the games his second year. And I remember having a conversation with Mick. I'll never forget this. I'm at practice. This is in his second year. And we're sitting there, and I said, how you doing with everything? And, Mick's not good at, like, filtering what he wants to say, at least at that point. And he looks at me, he goes, everyone wants me fired. I hear it. I know. He says, people yelling at the game. I know they want me fired. He goes, I ain't going nowhere. And he goes, I got a kid coming in next year. And he's talking about Yancey Gates. And he goes, Yancey Gates is going to lead to getting this other kid. He's talking about Lance Stevenson. He goes, then we're going to be rocking and rolling, and then everyone's going to start coming back and filing in. That's simple. He's like, I'm good. And he was right. Like, he was – that's exactly what, kind of happened. You look at Des Ridder. After the first 3 games, what did everybody want to do? Bench Des Ridder. Right. And it's just the reality of it. And I think so many fans on Twitter want Coach Brandon. Oh, he's not the guy. He needs to go. The administration needs to look at, moving on, after the season, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, Jesus, you got to give people, you got to give people a chance, kind of i.e. Mick. And secondly, you got to have faith in the people you hire. For example, Fickle had faith in Des Ridder, his quarterback. Regardless of all the outside noise, he was like, this is my guy. It might have been a little hurt or whatever the case was early on, but this is my guy. He's going to lead us there. And sure enough, he did. So what do you have to say to the Bearcat fans in regards to Coach Brandon?
Yeah, I mean, I see it too, and I realize a lot of times that's people out of frustration saying, like, he's not the guy, he should be fired. Whether it's in the moment frustration or people actually believe that's way too reactionary. This is a team that they won 20 games last year,
Yep.
Him coming in kind of definitely a difficult, tough situation, and I realize things aren't going well right now, but this is also a fan base that is not doesn't have a ton of experience with coaching changes. They had
True. Great point.
If obviously the Andy Kennedy year, but for the most part, they've had 2 head coaches in the past 30 years.
Yep.
Like that's
great point.
and those were two really good coaches, and they brought a lot of stability. And so I think that has kind of fogged how difficult that transition can be because, yeah, you referenced it. If you think back, and there were a lot of factors to when Mick took over that are different than what John is inheriting, whether you talk about some of the sanctions or scholarships or Big East. Like, I'm not trying to, make the perfect comparison, but, like, that was a process of him turning things around and kind of getting it back to where it got. And this is what happens in coaching changes. Even if it's, Mick Cronin wasn't fired and like the program bottomed out, like, when I compare it to football or something like that. Yeah, it was a good situation on the surface when John took over, but there's always roster turnover. There's always transition when a coach comes in, even if it's like a good situation. And,
yep.
We saw it with Xavier the past couple of years. You see it at pretty much any other place. It's very rarely for somebody to step in and year one or even year two just completely flip the script. So, things are bad right now, but I think anyone that's like already to, jump off the bandwagon or say like we need to make a coaching change, to me that is too reactionary. I think you got to give John Brennan a chance to put in his system and get his recruits in. And, from my perspective, I think he's earned the right to do that so far with what he's done, especially last year.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I realize fans are passionate and that's certainly, and it's your right as a fan to feel that way. But from my perspective, yeah, that seems way too hasty. You'd definitely like to see some progress and like to see things get better this year and see some recruiting progress for 2021. But anything that's kind of like this was the wrong choice, that just to me seems way too quick to move to that level.
Well said. How can people follow you on social media?
At Williams_Justin on Twitter. That's really the only social media I'm present on.
Wait, you're not on TikTok? You're not dancing? Come on,
I'm not on TikTok.
You're missing out. You're missing out, man.
I know.
That's where the party's at. You're in the corporate building on Twitter. The TikTok's where the party's at, bro.
I'm just, I'm in that like weird zone where I'm not old, but I'm not cool either. So it's TikTok scary for me. But then, yeah, they can find me on The Athletic. There are a bunch of obviously awesome writers, and you get to follow any sport and any team imaginable on there, including the Bearcats. So if people aren't subscribed yet, even in the midst of a little bit disappointing basketball season, I would encourage them to check us out.
You know what? You're a fantastic, writer, and I tell you, I think what you do very well, because I read your articles. You grab the real topic at hand, and you try your best to address it, and I like that. And it's a funny story. So I got a good friend named Glenn Riley. He's a very, very well-read guy. Loves sports, loves following things, and I sent him a couple of your articles, and he was like, "Man, this is good stuff." I mean, of course, he follows the Bearcats, and he ended up subscribing to The Athletic because of your writing. And so I really would tell all the Bearcat fans out there to jump aboard that and definitely check out your articles because you definitely do great stuff. And I know that you just wrote a football and basketball article just at the start of the year, correct?
Yeah. No, I appreciate you saying that. We'll still have some football stuff, whether it's finishing up the year or just some of the off-season moves, and obviously, tons of basketball for the next couple of months. But that's very kind of you. I appreciate you saying that. I'll look into. I need to get you a commission on. You can convince everybody to sign up.
No. All good, man. I try to spread it out there, man. Okay, so we're at the end of the podcast, and what I want to do with you here is do quick questions and quick answers. All right? Are you ready?
Yes, sir.
All right, here we go. Quick question, quick answers with Justin Williams. Number one, please tell me your dream interview.
Bob Dylan.
Whoa. Explain.
I'm a huge Bob Dylan fan, and he's like a total recluse weirdo, and I just think it'd be fascinating to sit down with him. My other answer, I'm a huge Seinfeld fan. I'm a big Jerry Seinfeld guy, but okay. he seems intimidating from an interview standpoint.
Yeah,
and Dylan does too, but almost like in a weirder way. So I don't know why, but that would be my go-to.
I don't know Dylan that well. I know Jerry Seinfeld. I agree with you on that. It's like you have to ask him certain questions. Otherwise, he just feels like he's just going to kill you.
Right. Yeah, like I would just be wanting to talk about Seinfeld reruns, and I know he doesn't want to do that, so it probably wouldn't go very well.
That ain't happening. Okay, number 2, dream job.
Bearcats beat writer for The Athletic, right? I don't know. I mean, it's funny. People always ask me, like, oh, what do you want to do, or, what's kind of the next step in your career? Like, I wasn't a beat writer before this. I wasn't grinding it out at a newspaper for years. I kind of came from a magazine background. Like, I don't want to go full Luke Fickell, but, like, I love what I'm doing right now because I feel like I'm still learning so much about the beat. And, I grew up here, so I have a connection to the city. So I know that's like a lame, answer, but I just feel like I have there has been no shortage of things to cover and write about on this beat for the 2-3 years that I've been on it. So I haven't even had a chance to think about it yet.
That's good stuff. Okay, that's fair enough. Okay, my third question, and this is basketball specific. Okay, if you could be one Bearcat basketball player in history, who would it be? And it cannot be Oscar Robertson.
That's probably going to be my answer.
That can't be the Big O.
I'll bring this up just because, like, it's my personal connection. I was a huge Danny Fortson fan growing up. That was just like kind of that era was right when, I was younger and in Cincinnati. And then, certainly as I went away to college, I probably lost a little bit of attention that I was paying to the Bearcats. But I just, growing up when Fortson was playing, like, that was the guy. He was such a beast. And I think you can trace, and you could speak to this better than I could, but I think you can trace a lot of as great as that Final Four team run was in '92, I think a lot of kind of the Bearcat mentality, Bearcat ethos kind of started with Fortson, at least in my mind. And that I always had a childhood connection to that. And just that, like, how dominant he was in the post and kind of the mindset he gave the program. That would be my pick.
Well, and to piggyback what you said, you think about Kenyon Martin. Kenyon Martin goes as one of the more decorated players in Bearcat history. Kenyon Martin really benefited from Danny Fortson, and I'll tell you why. So way back when Danny was playing, I'll never forget this story, they were playing like Marquette, and Marquette ran this play. And for the life of them, Hugs could not stop that play, and he loved it. And he actually stole that play and ran it for Danny Fortson. And that made Danny Fortson a lot of money in the NBA. Now, fast forward to when I played, I came in the same time as Kmart. We had a play called 25, and it was for Kenyon Martin. And one day, it's just out of the blue, someone was like, why is this called 25? And Hugs was like, we ran it for Danny Fortson, and he's in the NBA, so we're running it for Kenyon. And that play 25 was for Kenyon, and that play was part of the reason that Kenyon made a lot of money in the NBA. So you are right, though. Like, Danny was that impact guy, man. Definitely.
That would be my pick.
Yep. So, okay, number 4 and final. And I had this kind of predetermined this question, but I might have to change directions with your first answer. What was the last hip-hop album you listened to?
Oh, last hip-hop album. Like, is this, like, last new hip-hop artist album I listened to, or just in general?
In general.
That's a good question. It's kind of like, well, I'm a big Outkast guy.
Ooh, little Andre 3000 and Big Boy.
Yeah, I love Andre, so there's probably like that would be mixed in there somewhere. I realize, if you're just taking the full like, sign of the times and everything going on right now, this isn't like maybe the best answer, but I always get drawn back to the old Kanye stuff. Okay. And like I know he's kind of gone off the reservation at times a little bit, but man, like.
Left the reservation.
I was not, I know like some people love the 808s and Heartbreaks, and that's gotten a lot of respect lately, but I was never huge on that. But like I think what is it, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy or whatever
By
that
far
is.
his best album. That's
and you know what I just started listening to recently, and it took me back because it was kind of like it came out right as I was getting out of college. Was that Watch the Throne album? Like I found myself listening to that the other day and forgetting what a big deal that was when it came out. But so if that's literally the answer, like the actual last hip hop album, I went back and listened to the Watch the Throne album while I was driving the other day, and it was the first time I think I'd actually listened to that whole album or most of it in a long time. And it was a little nostalgic. It threw me back to college a little bit, but I was also like, this is a good album.
Isn't that fascinating that, you know, you could go and revisit an album and it's just like, this is like genius. This is fantastic. And you go back and I do that. I'm a big Jay-Z fan, and I do that with Jay-Z's music all the time. I go back and I listen to songs. I'm like, holy! I find new stuff all the time. But I do want to say something real quick. So you talk about Bob Dylan, and he's obviously a different guy. You mentioned Outkast. Andre 3000 is definitely a different dude. He walks around, I guess, in Atlanta a lot, and he plays his flute. Have you heard about this?
He's one of those guys that he's kind of like in the Bill Murray zone, Andre 3000, right, where it's like any story of what he does, you know, popping up in different places, like I'll believe it. So I had not heard that he plays his flute walking around Atlanta, but that doesn't shock me to hear that.
I mean, I've had friends send pictures to me of him like outside of Whole Foods playing a flute, and they're like, I'm like, is he okay? Like, did you like put change down, or what was the deal with it? And he's like, no, he wasn't like panhandling or anything. Like, just kind of bizarre. And then you mentioned Kanye, who you said, you know, a little off the reservations. Those are three interesting characters. Those will be three fascinating interviews, Justin.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I hadn't like put it together that way, but you're right. Maybe there's some kind of like eccentric, misunderstood genius that like I'm attracted to, potentially because it's like complete opposite of me. I'm so boring and milquetoast that like I'm fascinated by these guys that are a little bit hard to grasp, I guess.
Yeah, no question.
Well, I'm not on TikTok either, so there you go. We all tied it in.
Well, man, this is great stuff. I always love talking Bearcat basketball with you, man, and obviously had you on episode 19 and now episode 72. So we definitely got to do this again soon. We got to do it before the end of the season, and hopefully a lot of the things that we talk about, they've been improved on and addressed, and we can kind of go back and see. See, I told you, we're gonna do that. That sound good?
We'll be able to go back and compare and see if any of the things we were looking for, how they panned out, which could be good, or let's just hope they're good. Let's end on that.
They will be. I have faith. I always have faith. So hey, I want to thank you for coming on, and definitely be checking out your stuff as always, and we'll definitely talk soon. I wish I could see you at a game, but I'm not going to any games this year. So
I know that's the way it is, but no, I appreciate you having me on. I always appreciate you, Meach.
No problem at all, brother. We'll catch up. Take care.
Thanks, man.
Thanks, Justin. Bye-bye.